Welcome back. As we've been saying, tensions are building in the Senate ahead of Thursday's hearing with Brett Kavanaugh and one of his accusers. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell echoed Judge Kavanaugh's claim that the accusations are, quote, a smear campaign.
As he wrote in his own letter to Chairman Grassley yesterday, the weaponization of unsubstantiated smears, that's what we have here, the weaponization of unsubstantiated smears will dissuade competent and good people of all political persuasions from service.
Well, the Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer fired back at that.
Leader McConnell owes an apology to Dr. Ford for labeling her allegations a smear job.
I'm joined now by Illinois Democratic Senator Dick Durbin. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee and, of course, the number 2 member in the Democratic leadership in the Senate. Senator Durbin, good to see you.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
Well, I know you have heard the news that the Senate Republicans in the Judiciary Committee have hired outside counsel. It's my understanding you haven't that you have not been informed or hadn't been informed as of a couple of hours ago. Have you been informed since?
No, and we're still waiting. This mystery guest is going to appear on Thursday. I hope that we learn who it is ahead of time.
Do you think Democrats on the Judiciary Committee ought to appoint one person to ask questions? If this is the way it's going to be, I had a guest previously who said, you know, maybe it'll make a more coherent round of questioning anyway. How do the Democrats plan to handle this?
Listen, Chuck, I spent a long time running for the Senate and hoping to be on the Senate Judiciary Committee, to serve on that committee at historic moments like this. It wasn't to delegate this authority to some lawyer at this point. I think our committee is prepared to do this in a professional way. We're going to treat both witnesses with respect. We're going to try to establish the facts as best we can, and then come to a conclusion about whether or not Brett Kavanaugh should be given his promotion to a lifetime appointment on the highest court of the land.
How are you going to decide the credibility of the accusation and the denial? What are you looking for? Because it's we're not going to have the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. I think everybody understands that. So what are you looking for?
Well, you look for the testimony of the people under oath. They understand the seriousness of this. As far as Dr. Ford is concerned, I've always thought she has everything to lose and nothing to gain by stepping forward and telling this story. Look what she's been through. She's been ridiculed by the President of the United States. She's had her family moved out of their home because of death threats. She's faced all sorts of charges, many of them completely false, and she had to know that going in. And yet she felt it was important enough to tell the American people her experience and to share them. That says a lot about her credibility. As far as Judge Kavanaugh is concerned, he's completely denied that anything happened. We'll wait and hear his testimony under oath.
You know, in her letter to Senator Grassley, Dr. Ford indicated she was trying to get this on the radar of official Washington before Judge Kavanaugh was actually nominated. The system in that sense didn't work in time. Why?
Well, I'm not sure the system is really prepared for what we are now facing. The Me Too movement and the disclosures that are coming forward are fairly unique in American political history. You have to go back 27 years on the Supreme Court to the Anita Hill episode, which
but
people
let me pause you there.
Talk about it. Sure.
Is it unique, or shouldn't that have been, after that episode, the time that the United States Senate said, you know what, we got to figure out how to deal with allegations like this?
I don't question what you just said. I think we could have done a better job over the years. But, you know, in all honesty, look at every aspect of our public life, whether we're talking about business or religion or politics. This is all emerging, constantly emerging. We're learning day to day that there are facts in the history of this country and in the history of individuals which no one had an idea on.
Kellyanne Conway the other day said something interesting. She said, you know, if you take the accusations at face value, one thing that is different about Judge Kavanaugh and the accusations against him versus the Me Too movement is that he didn't do this when he had power. And I guess the question is this: when should actions in high school and college matter 30 years later, and when shouldn't they? Or should they always? Like, what is that test now?
Chuck, I tell you, this is different than the usual situation of complaints about a person seeking a higher position or higher office. I really step back here. We've had the people, the tribes, the political tribes break either favoring Kavanaugh or opposed to Kavanaugh. But what I've been struck by, in speaking to my own staff and my friends and people are more open telling me things about themselves than they've ever told anyone. We are at a point in life where we are looking at things from a new perspective, and people are finally summoning the courage to step up and say things which are hard as heck to say, and they just believe they have to be said. So this is a new moment, a new generation of thinking. It's the right thinking to finally come to grips with this challenge.
Would you open an investigation into a Justice Kavanaugh if he ends up getting confirmed, if you feel as if this was a political push, after Thursday, everybody got into their corners. It's a partisan confirmation, 50-50 with Pence or 51-49. Would you reopen the inquiry if Democrats took back the Senate?
Well, let me tell you, at this point, I'm not at that stage. You're a couple steps ahead of the reality of what we face. A hearing with Dr. Ford as well as Judge Kavanaugh, then the committee meeting, then the floor consideration, then the final vote, several stages ahead. And each of these witnesses who will appear before us on Thursday will be under oath to tell the truth. I hope that they do. And in telling the truth, I hope we can come to a better conclusion as a Senate Judiciary Committee. In terms of future investigations and future inquiries, I don't want to go there.
Well, let me ask you one other future question, and that is, if Democrats win the Senate, are you open to bringing back the filibuster? Because a lot of us believe if the filibuster, if it were a 60-vote threshold, this would just be a different process.
It's interesting. A Republican senator this morning in the gym raised the same question with me. And I said, I think we're learning our lesson here, that eliminating the filibuster on the Supreme Court, at least, and maybe the other federal court positions, has really created a much more political process. It is better for us to move towards something that's bipartisan and try to find more moderate people to serve on our federal judiciary.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois. Thank you, sir. Always appreciate you coming on, sharing your views.
Thanks, Chuck.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.